My name is Kari Barclay. I'm the Community Engagement Associate for the San Francisco Mime Troupe. We are an activist Tony Award-winning theater group that has been speaking truth to power for the past 60 years. And usually you'll see us all around the Bay Area and all throughout California, making theater for free in public parks. And this summer, because of COVID, we are taking to the internet to be presenting a series of 9 episodes, radio plays, under the name Tales of the Resistance. So we are here to talk today to talk about episode 3, which is called Fear of the Dark, the Good Cop, which we have a panel of an artist and an expert to talk about the issues that we're engaging with in the topic. Before I begin, I want to start by acknowledging that I'm broadcasting from Ohlone land and the San Francisco Public Library as well, as sort of built on Ohlone land, and encourage you, wherever you are, to put in the chat the indigenous land that you're on. Part of our work as activists, as artists, is to acknowledge the history of the land and to work together to fight for indigenous rights all around us. I'll get us started by offering some introductions and asking our guests to introduce themselves. We are joined today by Velina Brown of the San Francisco Mime Troupe, who directed this summer's series, Tales of the Resistance, and as well James Burch, who is policy coordinator for the Anti-Police Terror Project. So very glad to have both of y'all here. First, can Velina, do you mind introducing yourself and telling us more about your role with the Mime Troupe?
Sure. So yes, I'm Velina Brown. I am a collective member with the San Francisco Mime Troupe. The collective is the artistic director of our company. And so we make decisions together in that way. I have been with the company now as a collective member for a little over 20 years now. And, but I first started working with the troupe in 1992. So I have a long experience with the troupe. And yeah, so this particular project, I'm the director, and this is my first time directing a Mime Troupe summer project. I've been in most years, I've been in the shows touring around the parks, probably in a park near you. But this time I'm directing. So, and it's just a really steep learning curve of going from doing shows in the parks to taking it online and creating a radio series. And, but we were just really excited to, when we realized our head writer, Michael, loves radio plays, and he says, well, what if we do that? And so we were really thrilled to have a chance to actually bring something to our audience on July 4th.
Thank you so much, Velina. James, do you mind introducing yourself and talking a little bit about Aptp as an organization?
Not at all. And thanks again for having me. This is wonderful. It's great to be here. It's great to share space with y'all, with the Mime Troupe, and great to be able to share more about something that I'm very passionate about. My name is James Burch. I live on Huichin territory on Ohlone land in so-called Oakland. I work for the Anti-Police Terror Project. We are a volunteer-based organization that seeks to end police violence in communities of color. We're founded in the wake of the rebellion that followed the murder of Oscar Grant, hitting the streets to demand justice and put pressure on city officials. And over time, we've developed strategies to address police violence proactively, whether it be through community engagement, policy work, healing work, legal work, or other avenues. I'm the policy director, meaning my job is to ensure that the community is engaged in policy work matters and empowered to develop radical policy proposals and make them a reality.
Great. Thank you so much for those introductions. I'd like to ask each of you all, like, how, first off, I want to ask, like, how did you get involved in the organizations that you're working with? Velina, how did you start making artwork in general, and how do you start doing work in theater and with the Mime Troupe? And James, sort of what led you to APTP's work?
Well, I think it'll be too long if I start with how did I start being an actor, but how I got involved with the Mime Troupe is that my partner at the time, now husband, Michael Sullivan, was the lead in a show called Seeing Double. And that show was about the Israel-Palestine conflict. And I didn't really know anything about it. It's not something that was taught in school. And basically, whenever someone would bring up the Middle East, they would just go, it's complicated, and like, that's all they would say. And I would be like, oh, okay. And it wasn't until I saw Seeing Double that had, a huge writing team. At the time, Joan Holden, who was head writer for 33 years, was the head writer of this, but it was a big team and it had people who were, from many, many different sides. It was like 15 writers of this issue. And I just, people who were Americans, who were, Jewish Americans and Palestinian Americans, as well as Israelis and Palestinians that lived there, and on lots of different sides from that. And from getting to see this piece that was talking about something that was really, like, was in the news. At that point, it was much more in the news, but I didn't really understand what the background of it was. And it was really smart, and it was funny, and there was great music. And I was just really learning about something that I didn't know about. I was very impressed and really inspired to want to work with the troupe myself. And at the time I just thought, oh, wow, wouldn't it be nice if I could just do one show, like have that experience just once? And so 27 years later, I've done a lot with the troupe. And so for me, the thing that kind of kept me coming back, because it was like 7 years before I became part of the collective, because I wasn't really interested in being in all those meetings, frankly. I just wanted to be an actor and a singer. And but I really liked the idea of being able to use my my talents and my skills, my passion for performing in a way that helped other people get, have the experience that I had when I saw Seeing Double. There's so much that's not really, all the different sides are not shown. When you're seeing something through corporate media, things are skewed in a certain way to give us a very narrow picture of what's happening. And so, so that's what's been really exciting for me, and really helped me, I have to say, really helped me live through the George W. Bush years, which now seem like paradise compared to what's going on now. From, not really paradise, but it's worse now. And so that really was very helpful to me, to be able to just, not feel like I'm just a victim of all of just horrible things happening, and just having a response to them, and feeling, frustrated and not sure and what to do. And, or being able to take the information and the experience and tell a story about it, that is from our meaning people who work for a living, the working class, and, and follow a quote unquote regular person on a journey through, the obstacles of what's happening, and really help other people understand what's going on. Because a lot of times, see, what the news will tell you is everything's great. Mostly, the economy's doing great. People are doing things, it's rebounding, it's bouncing back. And so then the average person, like the 99%, will look at that and go, oh, well, why am I having such a hard time? I guess there's something wrong with me, and I really like being able to be part of telling the story of, what, it's just, they're not talking to us. They make it seem like they're talking to us, but they're not talking to us. They're talking to this narrow group of people who are benefiting from our suffering. And it's certainly not the Mexicans, that have taken your job. I don't know how many applications you've turned in to pick fruit or whatever it is, like that. It's like someone who is struggling just as hard as you are is not the cause of your struggling. It's the people who get to make these decisions that affect all of us. That's who is causing this. And that's why our suffering helps them make more money and feel like the economy is great. And nobody really talks about it in that way on the news. So it's really helpful to me as an artist and as a human to have an avenue to discuss these things and share these things. And so that's what's kept me doing this for 27 years.
Amazing. And just to jump on that for listeners who might not know, things to add, that we don't take any corporate donations as the Mime Troupe. We're all sort of grassroots, fed by folks who see us for free in the parks. And as well, Velina talked about being on the collective, and it's a group that's run as a collective rather than having a single artistic director, to be trying to put those like democratic ideals of art making that's really coming from the people, putting that into practice. So thank you so much, Velina. James, do you want to tell us how you got involved with Aptp?
For sure. And again, similar to Velina, a very long story. So I'll keep, I'll try to not tell you my whole life in one fell swoop here. But suffice to say, since I was very little, criminal justice has been an issue that's impacted my family. I have 3 older siblings, and they've all had countless negative experiences with the criminal justice system and society as a whole. And so from a little kid, I think I always had the view, not so for me, I had relative privilege compared to them. And so for me, I was always just looking at the disparity between how they were treated by society and how I've been treated by society, and a strong, a burning desire to do something about that. And so I think as my politics have grown and matured, my idea about what it is that should be done has changed. Like when I was in college, I taught or I facilitated a short story and poetry class at a local correctional institution. And then after college, I went to fight against the horrors that are correctional institutions after seeing, more intimately what long-term facilities were like. And then after that, I realized, you could fight the state all day from the position of an attorney, but if you're not empowering the people, then what are you doing? And to that last point, I really credit the Frisco 5 movement, who I imagine many people listening are familiar with here in San Francisco, the 5 hunger strikers who demanded the firing of Chief Greg Sir in the wake of a number of police murders here in San Francisco. And Alex Nieto, Mario Woods, Luis Gongora Pat, Amilcar Perez Lopez. There was just a spate of murders and no accountability here in San Francisco, and it was the people, namely the Frisco 5, who united, folks under that banner, who just said, "This enough is enough, and we're not going to eat anymore until something is done about this." And so, just how inspiring that was for me as an individual, and how inspiring it was for the city of San Francisco, really had a life-changing impact on how I saw myself as, at that point, a lawyer in the movement trying to make change. It's not on me to figure out the answers on anyone's behalf. It's my job to listen to folks and to amplify their voices and to try to empower them and combine their dreams with the current realities of policymaking in this world. And so that's where I find myself now.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that sounds really fascinating, that journey of trying to balance being in a church, like being a lawyer and judging, and like bringing that skill set, but also like how are you empowering people to like be a movement as well. So we'll have to talk a little bit more about that later. Just 2 weeks ago, we had Rupa Maria from the Do No Harm Coalition, who as well was talking about the Frisco 5 and how they were so inspiring for her as well. So it's clear how much of an impact that they've had in the Bay. I would like to go ahead and share for our listeners, for you all, a little excerpt from our episode, so that we can that we'll get to talk about in a minute. So again, this is episode 3, Fear of the Dark, and this is part at the very beginning of the episode that centers around the protagonist of the story, Primo, and you will hear it in just a second.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to the Abyss. This is your guide, the Gravekeeper, with another tale to shiver your spine and shatter your privilege. Tell me, are you afraid of the dark? Are you frightened by the blackness of the night, the blackest of the shadows, and the darkness of those people? Are you one of those who don't know what all the fuss is about, all these protests are about? Do you think the dark should just lighten up? Or do you think the dark are out to get you? Well, tonight we have a tale about a fellow who might be just like you. He may even be you. Nowadays, he's a bartender who serves drinks, but he used to protect and serve. Yes, Primo the bartender is a retired police officer. A good cop, he'd say. But while his eyes were brown, it seems he always only saw through the whites. It's the story of the good cop.
I don't know, Primo. What's the country coming to?
Yeah, all these black rioters, always complaining. And right outside my bar.
Slavery's chains have never been broken. The board still remains.
Get a job, you commies!
Insulting the country, spitting on the flag, saying we gotta respect their freedom of speech, the First Amendment.
If freedom of speech is so important, why is it in the First Amendment? Nobody pays any attention to what's at the beginning of anything. That's the part you skip over.
Yeah, like skipping over the introduction of a book. Like when we read...
Everybody knows you don't put the good part at the start.
Back in school, we had to read...
The Second Amendment. That's where you start. That's where the important part is.
Last book I read, junior high.
And none of these rights are worth a damn without our right to bear arms.
The Secret of Nimha.
What?
It's about Mrs. Frisbee and a bunch of rats, but she's a mouse and they're smart and magical.
We protect the other amendments with the guns of the Second Amendment from all these...
And...
What?
I didn't read the introduction.
Point is, the Second Amendment is fundamental. Everything else is built on that. Guns and freedom. They should have put that at the top.
First.
Yeah.
But wouldn't people skip it?
Shut up.
Okay.
All right, I'll stop us there. So the rest of this episode is following Primo, who's this retired police officer, and his journey sort of confronting his past and all of the sort of instances of injustice that he may have witnessed over the course of his career. And something I admire about this episode is engaging with this horror genre. And as you can tell at the very start, parodying that in certain ways. And I'm curious, like in this conversation, as we're talking about the role of policing in society, Velina, how did this genre of horror come to be something that y'all were interested in exploring? And what do you see the role of fear in the current debates around policing, and sort of what you were interested in conveying in the episode?
Well, one of the things is that we just wanted to do a variety of genres that you can hear in radio plays. So there's horror, there like Tales of the Crypt or whatever, and there's adventure, and I can't even remember what all the different ones are we're doing now. But you know, we just wanted to do a variety of genres, because it's fun to do different styles, and it affects the kind of music that we're doing. that was, you know, like that was me and Jillian Eichenberg doing the ghostly voices in the back, you know, that sort of thing. And I think that part of it is that this is a horror show, what's going on, you know, that with this kind of, with the terror, I mean, the police operating as a terrorist organization in a lot of communities, and using fear as this way of controlling people and controlling, you know, just creating this sense of, you know, wherever you are, there's no place that you belong, you know, that you have to always be, you know, on edge and, you know, and living in fear, and then instilling with, you know, with the stereotyping and all that, sort of instilling fear in other people, non-Black people, so that when you see someone who's dark, then already there's a problem, you know. So yeah, I mean, fear is just a very classic way of controlling people, because when you're afraid, you're not thinking straight, you know. And if you're really feeling terror, you know, your frontal lobes are just hijacked, they're tossed out of the picture, and so then it's like fight, it's flight or freeze or whatever, and you know, let's just say that we're not at our best under those circumstances. And so yeah, I just think that really breaking that down, what's I mean, I've had this happen as a tall Black woman, right? And not super tall, like basketball tall, I'm 5'9". But just walking down the street and having, typically it is, you know, it's a white woman who will glance out of the corner of her eye, and she sees me, and all of a sudden she's clutching her purse and she's walking, you know, and she's looking like, all of a sudden her frontal lobes have been hijacked just that quick. And then when she can see that I'm a woman who, you know, is wearing a skirt and a blouse or something, you know, then all of a sudden, and then it's like, well, I saw something, she'll say something tall behind me. As sometimes she'll say something, I saw a dark figure, you know, whatever. And it's like, so this fear of the dark that creates all of these reactions that I've felt afraid. I've felt unsafe under those circumstances, you know, because when she's freaking out, then I had this experience in a parking lot where this woman's freaking out. We're walking in the same direction. I'm trying to get to my car just like she's trying to get to my car. So if I go the other direction because she's so scared, now I'm going in the opposite direction of my car, you know? So I'm walking towards my car and she's just carrying on, so that she caught the eye of a white man who saw her acting like she was in so much distress that all of a sudden he's looking at me like, what are you doing? And I felt unsafe, you know? And it wasn't until finally I got to my car and I could just get in the car. But like all of this fear that was created based on her imagination of who I was because I was Black, you know, and it just creates a lot of problems and danger for, you know, for everyone, but particularly for me in that situation.
Yeah, and it's this essentially white fear and like racist fear that gets turned into institutions, right? It gets turned into policing that instills terror on people of color. And so,
right.
I'm curious, I think it's the name Anti-Police Terror Project is incorporating this idea of terror in it. And I'm curious how you see that name, what that name is meaning, and how do you perceive terror in the context of your work?
Thanks so much, Velina, for all you said there. As a 6'5" Black man who considers himself, and don't tell anyone this, just relatively harmless in terms of my nature, the amount of times I perceived as a threat to someone's livelihood has really had an impact on the way I carry myself and the way I move through this world. And I never forget what I look like. And I never forget how tall and scary I am, because if I do, there can be serious consequences for me or for anyone else who happens to be in the area if there's law enforcement around and they decide that I'm a threat. And so it's just it is an ever-present reality for Black folks just walking around on the day-to-day, and the strain and trauma that creates over time, is taxing for even those of us with methodologies to deal with it. And so the Anti-Police Terror Project, I think I really am appreciating on this call the similarities between what we're trying to do at APTP and what you're trying to do with the Mime Troupe in terms of messaging, because we fight really hard over these battles over messaging and to get people to understand what is the reality for Black people. And so the way, I try to explain to white folks, if we're in a trusting space, is like, when I was a very little kid, the police were a serious threat to my family, and that's how I was introduced to them. And so like when I'm very young, maybe like, I don't know, maybe 4, and my mom's telling me never to let the police in my house without a warrant, and to remember and drill in the phrase, not without a warrant. I remember that talk. That's one of the first talks I remember having with my mom that was serious. That is just such a different reality than white people who dress up like cops for Halloween, or have officer friendly, come to the, to the farmer's market. And so how do we bridge that gap as the Anti-Police Terror Project? And the first way is to call it what it is. It's police terror, right? And so police are terrorizing our communities, and Black people who walk through this world, especially young Black youths, their greatest fear is generally law enforcement sharking around in their neighborhoods and what they could do to them. And so I consider the phrase Anti-Police Terror Project one of many ways we've been engaged in that fight to refuse to compromise when we're talking about our reality. Police don't patrol. The police don't keep us safe. They don't patrol our communities. They shark through our communities. They're predators in our communities, preying upon young people of color. And so we try to remain consistent in the way we talk about them and refuse to adopt the state's language when the state is trying to minimize and talk about the community policing that they're doing and talk about all these programmings that they're implementing in an attempt to paint themselves as something other than what they are, which is a terrorizing force.
I appreciate what you're saying about how people get socialized differently to like think about the police, because in my neighborhood, a very white suburban neighborhood, there are Black Lives Matter signs all over the place. But the other day, one of the signs got vandalized and everybody was saying, oh, you should call the police on the vandals. And I'm like, this is just such a disconnect of messaging of, because the person is white who has this sign outside, they're like, oh, I need to turn to the police for protection against vandalism. And so I think we need to get that understanding about the terror that the police inflict on communities, and predominantly communities of color, but also low-income communities, also disabled communities, queer communities. So I really appreciate the work that y'all are doing. Can you tell us a bit more, James, about what, so from a policy perspective, what are some of the policy goals of APTP, and sort of as there's a national conversation about what should the role of police be in our society, or should they have a role at all?
Thank you for that. More generally, we're an abolitionist organization, and we believe that the current system of policing is a failure by design, and it will never serve Black people when it comes to public safety. And so our vision for a system of public safety doesn't include anything that resembles this current system of policing. To get there through policy, one of the things that we're doing is we've been running the Defund Opd campaign for nearly 5 years with a stated goal to reduce the Oakland Police Department's budget by 50%, right? And so we're doing that for a number of reasons. One, because Oakland gives the police department 340 some odd million a year. And I think that number gets lost because we live in a world where big numbers become normalized. But again, we give the police $340 million every year in the name of public safety. And so the goal of the Defund OPD campaign is not only to take that money away, but to allow people to think about it objectively, because we kind of assume that police are a given and that they're just going to get what they need to keep us safe. And we never question whether they're keeping us safe, who, if anyone, they're keeping safe, what tools they're using to do so, who they're harming in the process, and like importantly for this, for our campaign, if that money can be better spent elsewhere, right? Because as we talked about, there's a divide between people who see the police as keepers of peace and people who see police as a disruptive and terrorizing force. And so me just going around to people who don't share my reality and saying, hey, come on, police don't keep me safe, we got to get rid of them, it hasn't been working. That hasn't been an effective mechanism for the conversation. But saying, hey, we give the police $330 million a year, right? What if we cut that in half? What if we spend $160 million on programs for housing and programs to serve people who require mental health services, or put it into Parks and Rec, or reentry for all of the people who are coming back, all of our people who are coming back from the jails and cages that we've put them in, right? And start really looking at what we're investing in, because I know a ton of community programs that run for $1 million budget, $800,000 budget or less, that create tangible results for our people. And so if we start talking about magnifying and amplifying and multiplying those effects, what will our reality look like at that point? And we believe firmly and think that the evidence supports that if we invested that money into community, we wouldn't need the police that we're currently paying for. And so the 50% that we want in Oakland is kind of a first step, right? Let's get half the budget out, reinvest those $160 million, and then really look at what's left, right? And our theory is if we did that, we would find that we could cut it in half again and again and again and again until until there was nothing left in this place where programs that really support people and keep them safe. Because again, if we imagine that everyone is housed, everyone is well fed, everyone has an income that supports their livelihood, right? And everyone, if they're dealing with mental health or interpersonal violence problems, there are programs to support them. Where is this crime coming from? And where is the need for these law enforcement officers who are going to be engaging them? And so that's what we're engaged at the local level, and supporting folks across the Bay Area who are working on the same, because in the wake of this current movement, defund chapters have popped up everywhere. Because if we think it's bad in Oakland, go to Vallejo, go somewhere where there is less infrastructure for community to fight back against repression and corruption, and imagine how much money their police get, and they basically write their own ticket. And so it's been supporting folks like that. And then at the state level, we are working on policies to kind of catch California up in areas where they're deficient. I'm not going to pretend that the state legislature is an area for radical policy making or making all of our dreams come true. And there are tangible things that need to be done there to keep Black people safe. Like, for instance, California is one of only 5, I believe, or 6 states that do not have a police decertification scheme at the state level, which means that if a police officer commits a crime or a misconduct out of policy, that they're decertified and can't be a cop anymore, right? Again, Georgia has a scheme, Alabama has a scheme, Florida has a scheme, Texas has one, but California does not. And as a result, there are officers across the state who would otherwise be decertified working in law enforcement departments. And to make matters worse, there are some departments who have the lowest standards. So if you get fired somewhere else, you can move to the place where nobody cares and they'll let you be a cop there, right? And so police decertification is an issue that we're working on. And then one last thing, we're working on providing, everyone tells us that we are working on the defunding part and not the refunding and investing in community part. And just to make clear to folks that that's not necessarily the most accurate. We are not only supporting plenty of folks have been doing this work for decades. Again, these community-based programs that truly keep us safe, these public safety programs have been happening informally for for longer than I've been alive. To imagine that, for instance, undocumented communities who aren't going to call police, don't have mechanisms to keep themselves safe, is naive to the realities of those communities and their brilliance when it comes to public safety. And so what we're trying to do is put together, we have a bill at the state level called AB 2054, and what it would do is give grants to organizations across the state who address crises, like whether it's interpersonal violence or mental health or a natural emergency, without the use of law enforcement, right? So for instance, Aptp Sacramento has a program called MH First, where they'll send people out into the community. They have a hotline, and they'll send people out into the community to create a safety plan with a person who's in a mental health crisis without using the cops, and with an intention and a methodology to provide that person with agency, so they can, if they find themselves in a similar crisis, use that plan again to keep themselves safe. And so again, there are people doing, we're not reinventing the wheel here. There have been people doing this. We're just trying to give them the resources they need to keep more people safe, because we know that the police, that 50% of the people killed by police in the state of California are currently are undergoing mental health crises.
Yeah, I think that's something that's I find really urgent to talk about. In East Bay, we have the dialogue around Miles Hall and the whole Justice for Miles Hall campaign in Walnut Creek. He being a person of color going through mental illness who was shot by the police there, and an incredible campaign organized in Walnut Creek around that. And it's really community organized responses to support mental health, to alleviate poverty, that are going to be the things that are going to stop crime in our communities, and not necessarily policing. And so I think, yeah, I love that you're thinking about what are these alternatives and how can we be directing funds there as a community. So I think, yeah, thank you so much for your work on that.
Yeah, I just want to
yeah.
just add on to that. I mean, just as a society, we have more tools at our disposal to deal with issues. We do have therapists and social workers, and like, we have a variety of tools, but that we're not using them. Like, the most funded tool is the hammer. And so then if the only tool that you've got is a hammer, then everything's treated as a nail. And I think that so then they come in and on when there's so many other things that we do have available, and people do want to have the opportunity to be able to intervene and to give service to. When I was working, I was an intern at Women Inc. in San Francisco. Women organized to make abuse non-existent. And so when I was working there, the thing that I noticed was just how little there was in terms of services to really help these 98% of the time, women calling in and needing help, needing shelter, needing a safe space to go to. And it was just, there was always a long list there, a waiting list to get in, and if someone is like calling from a closet that they've barricaded themselves into, and you hear the person pounding in the background, and you don't have anything to, to offer them because everything's full. Like, that shouldn't be the case. There's space. There is, in fact, space for people. It has to be funded and set up as safe space. So anyway, I just wanted to add on to what you were saying, James.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really important experience to hear and to think about with that. I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. If there's anything that you would like to ask either of our panelists, both our panelists, please go ahead and put those in the comments. And in the meantime, I did want to ask Velina what it's been like directing the show and recording the show remotely in the time of COVID. I bet, especially think about recording music. I know you've been a vocalist too with the troupe. Yeah, what has it been like making art these days?
Well, it's been fun to experience our own creativity and resilience in the face of it. It's been great to not just let, you know, the season go by and just go, okay, there's nothing we can do. The work of doing the tasks are a little different, you know, like there's still the writing, there's still rehearsal, which we rehearse. James, you had mentioned being a gamer. We switched actually from Zoom to Discord as our way of getting together and rehearsing, because that worked better for us. And then there's all those, like, it's much easier to get people into different rooms to rehearse off to the side and stuff like that. So that's been really fun and useful. That I think I think we'll continue to use Discord after this, you know, season that we're in, because it works really well. And then, so what we do, if you want to just know like how it happens, so everybody's in their home, and so we're rehearsing, we're discussing over Discord, and then when once we are ready to record, then we're reading the scene, playing the scene with each other over Discord, and we're recording either on Audacity or GarageBand. And so each person is recording themselves, right? But they're getting to play the scene with the other person, but they're recording themselves. Then they send all their takes to their part into to our sound person, engineer Taylor Gonzalez. And so then Taylor and I spend hours and hours and hours and hours, you know, going through the takes and finding which ones and making the timing the way that we need it to be, because there's like lag that happens, you know, and stuff when you're doing stuff over line, putting and stitching it all together and creating the sound effects and you know, so you know, I don't want to tell more than is interesting, but that's basically, we're recording individually and sending it to one person, our engineer, and then Taylor and I stitch it together. And then we have Daniel Savio, who is our composer lyricist, and we've got great musicians that work on creating the music, all that, the music sound effects and stuff like that. And we find ways to layer all of that in to tell the story.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds very good, very complex, but it's cool that you are able to record it in real time, like in dialogue, rather than trying to do separate recordings and then people act like they're listening. So anyway, it's neat to know that you're able to record it separately and put them all together. We have a comment coming in from the chat. What is our best response to those who thoughtlessly think defunding the police will leave them powerless against the threat of crime? And I guess, yeah, just something to add on that is like this episode follows a right-wing cop who at the start of the episode doesn't understand the protests and doesn't understand the calls to defund the police. So yeah, what do you think is, I'll leave the question as is, but how do we respond to folks who approach this topic with skepticism?
That's a great question. It's been something we've been working on at Defund Opd, the working group, for years now. And so I think one of the things we've been creating infographics to fight against this very notion for years. And so I encourage people to go facebook.com/defundopd, if I can plug us. But actually it's valuable because that's what we're trying to do for y'all, is show people how much money the police waste. And we do it in a whole bunch of different ways. We tell people that the police get more money than housing and parks and rec and human services and 7 other departments combined, right? We show them that they get 50% of our general fund, right? We show them if this is the kind of, if they believe in crime as a metric for society, which we do not, because you know, for a number of reasons, then you can show them that the crime rates have stayed flat over the last 20 some odd years, when the police budget has ballooned by 350%. You can tell them if Oakland, if policing made you safe, then Oakland should be the safest place in the country, if not the world right now. And it's not by any metric or any number. And so start to question it. And then again, you can look into what police do, right? Last month or in late June, we finally got numbers from the chief of police on what type of incidents the police were going out to or being called out to. And by our estimate, well over 50% of the calls were things that nobody would argue that police should be doing, right? Like mental health calls, or a abandoned vehicle, or a vehicle accident, or fireworks are going off, or noise disturbance, or a lot of people don't believe that police should do routine traffic stops, and just countless other areas where we spend millions, or the forcible evictions of the unhoused in the city in Oakland. They'll send, I think they're called Operation Dignity, who does the dirty work, and then the police stand behind them, 3, 4, 5, 6 officers, and watch. And how much does that cost the city every eviction? Another 10 grand on top of whatever we're spending to send in DPW. And so if we really look at the dollars, it's our position that we could cut half of the police budget and not even start having a conversation about any of the things people think police traditionally keep us safe from, safe from being murdered or assaulted violently. And then again, just to return to that, police are violence responders, not violence interrupters. And that's one of our missions at APTP, is to try to make that super clear. Like, there's we watch too many movies as our society about the cops where, Joe officer comes at the last second and dives around the corner with his gun and saves everybody's life. But that's not what happens. The shit goes down, there are victims, and the police come have a conversation with the victims about what has happened. And why does that have to be a cop? Right? If someone's interviewing and getting information for an investigation, why wouldn't that be a grief counselor because we have a victim of violence? Why would it be a cop and risk re-traumatizing folks? And so again, this conversation, it's hard because you ask if they're thoughtlessly think defunding the police leaves them powerless, because what we're asking people to do is actually think about the police for the first time in their lives and think about how much money we spend on them and what we're getting for that money.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we get to Velina, is there a way that you would recommend folks get involved with APTP, ways that they can support? You mentioned the AB 2054, or any campaigns to get behind Defund Opd, programs like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We're also, the decertification bill I'm talking about is SB 731, sponsored by Bradford. We've had a lot of difficulty with that bill because you can imagine law enforcement doesn't want to get decertified. So so support for that bill is definitely welcome. The pressure to defund the police has led to Oakland agreeing to create a reimagining public safety task force with a stated goal of defunding the police over 50% or by 50% in the next budget cycle, which starts next June. And so they're looking for people to be on the task force itself. So if you live in Oakland, you can apply. They're looking for people to serve as an advisory council for the task force. So if you care about this issue, they want a bunch of people to just give their input and do that. And then also you can go to antipoliceterrorproject.org and sign up to work with us, because we don't trust city task forces to bring about the change we need without public pressure or without community pressure. Like, we have never, as the Anti-Police Terror Project, gotten a dime, gotten a step forward on any of the policies we've wanted passed without intense community pressure. And this situation's no different. So it's a huge victory for us that the city is acknowledging where we are right now and acknowledging that we've pressured them to have this conversation. But until the police are defunded by 50%, we need all hands on deck. And so there's some ways folks can definitely plug in and support.
Thanks so much. And Velina, do you have a response to that question that somebody posted in the chat about how would you respond to skeptics?
Well, basically, I would say, similar to what James was talking about earlier, that it's like, if people I think it's important to think about why crime is happening generally. And aside from, a lot of it is happening out of mental health issues, and then a lot of it is happening out of desperation, you know. And so if people have the housing that they need, the food that they need, they, you know, they're not having to constantly be thinking about how am I going to get this? How am I going to get this? Because they have what they need, then you're not going to miss the cops, because you're not going to have the impulse to call them if, you know, on situations that, you know, can be handled otherwise. Now, I mean, I think that if you have someone who does tend to abuse calling the police, I don't think even the police enjoy being called because, you know, someone is barbecuing, you know. I think that they would rather not just be called, because used as a tool in such an overt way. So, but if you are someone who tends to just want to call someone because there's a Black person having coffee at Starbucks, you know, then I guess you will miss the police. But if you're someone who's really concerned about actual crime and how to deal with actual crime, a lot of it will be reduced if people aren't in a desperate situation, trying to figure out how to take care of themselves or their family.
Yeah, certainly. And something I appreciate about the Mime Troupe, and generally, like, and a lot of the troupe's work, in particular this summer, it's putting those conversations around policing and racial justice in conversations with economic justice. And the troupe has always put those together, and I appreciate both of y'all bringing that emphasis together and bringing that emphasis to this conversation as well. Well, oh yeah, go ahead, Velina. Yeah.
Well, the other thing that I want to bring up is that, you know, the thing about the role of the police vis-a-vis Black people, there's something called the Fugitive Slave Act. And you know, my husband has written a play about this, about people who did escape, and this law was enacted that if you come across, that's saying, as a white person to another white person, if you come across my property, even if they are North, that's my property, and you are supposed to bring them back. And that people can deputize themselves and others to bring back the wayward slave. And in general, it really seems like that is the interaction that's what the interaction looks like. That if you are a Black person in a situation, in a context that a white person isn't expecting to see a Black person, then it's like they're loose and someone needs to come get them, you know? And it's just it's a certain mindset. I guess that's the other thing that we need to address, though, is that regardless, we do need to address this mindset of seeing Black people moving about freely in the world wherever they want to go, to stop seeing that as a problem that needs intervention and correction, and they're loose and you need to come get them, you know? So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah.
Stop seeing Black people as escaped slaves.
Yeah, and just to add,
yeah, please,
sorry, just to jump right on top of that, I agree with that 100%. And if we just look at the origins of systems of control, whether it be policing or the so-called conquest of the United States by the imperialist troops of the United States, and the deployment of the National Guard, Black people and Indigenous people in this country, as was so eloquently said by Velina, if we're out of pocket, we're to be dealt with. And so there have been situations, and again, I am a Black lawyer and have had the privilege of not looking like a Black lawyer as I walk through this world. And so the difference in the way I'm treated when I'm Black lawyer James versus when I'm James with the beard and the nappy afro are dramatically different and reflect this idea that at any time I can be seen as essentially as a fugitive slave out of pocket that needs to be snatched up. And so I appreciate putting that context on it, because that's the reality for a lot of Black people in this country. Is we have gone, they are always under threat when they, whether they're in their homes or outside of their homes, of being dispossessed of everything they have because a white man said so. And that's the end of the story, and they could go to prison for the rest of their lives on that alone. And so that's never changed for Black people in this country, and keenly aware of that today.
Yeah, and it's a combination of both civilians policing public space in terms of feeling that fear that we were talking about, but then deputizing the police to also police public space and the way in which folks can circulate and just live their lives in the world around us. So I thank you both for bringing that link up. We are at time, so I want to go ahead and thank both of you so much for this great discussion. Again, I encourage people to check out the Anti-Police Terror Project's work online. And as well, the San Francisco Mime Troupe, we are continuing our Tales of the Resistance for another 6 episodes, and we'll be meeting for these panel discussions every other Saturday. So you can tune in 2 weeks from now, and check out all of our work at sfmt.org. And I hope you all have a good afternoon. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Nice to meet you, James.
And nice to meet you too.
Thanks, Kari.
Yeah, thanks so much, Velina.
And thanks, Public Library. Thank you.
Yay, thank you, SFPL.